No role plays, just real. Chris and Lorenzo share 4 decades of combined experience to help you become a more effective leader.
We've never really, as a workforce, spent a lot of time on making sure we're developing good leaders.
We'll be able to share stories, experience, mistakes, failures, successes.
This is Hacking Your Leadership.
Welcome to Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Chris.
And I'm Lorenzo.
And Lorenzo, on this episode, I want to talk about firing people.
Oh, okay.
It's not a fun thing to do, obviously. Well, I mean, it probably is for some people, but we're talking to potentially good leaders here. So hopefully if you're listening to this right now, it's not fun for you. You know, the only time I've ever enjoyed firing somebody was when they were a person that I felt like I invested a lot into to try to salvage the relationship with the organization, with that person, to try to re-inspire them, you know, kind of make them productive and engaged again, because I kind of inherited them and they already had a chip on their shoulder. And I went out of my way, and I think I did more than I probably should have. And I felt like I was taking advantage of it. And so when the day finally came when I had the right paperwork in place and it was time to make that happen, there was a little bit of a, you know, thank goodness this is over thing. That's the only time I've really enjoyed doing it. Every other time that I've had to, and it hasn't been that many, it's been a rough conversation, and it's been something that was rougher in my mind before it happened than the actual conversation itself with the employee. And so I'm wondering, is this something you think a lot of leaders struggle with? Have you ever had to fire somebody, and how did that go?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think after 20 some years in retail and leadership, there's a lot of terminations that I've been involved in. And I think it depends on the reason. You know, I've been involved in conversations for terminations. You know, the ones that are kind of the easier ones are the ones where somebody's behavior is, against the values, of the organization, or it's an integrity issue, or it's a theft issue, or they did something that was, threatening to an employee or to a customer, things like that, where like it's very cut and dry and pretty clear that type of behavior is not tolerated. I think
not necessarily a fun conversation, but at the end of the day, no one's going to say, "No, I didn't do that." It's right. you have your ducks in a row, and you just have to make it happen.
Absolutely, and for the most part, at least they understand that what they did was wrong, and like that type of behavior will resort in this type of inaction. I think the harder ones are the ones where people make mistakes, and the intent is not necessarily there in regards to doing something wrong or trying to cause an issue or offending somebody or that type of thing. But whether it's emotions get the best of them, or they weren't clearly thinking about something, or they made a call and it was the wrong call. Sometimes mistakes are career stallers and sometimes they're career enders. So, in those situations where somebody wasn't trying to cause an issue or a riff or a problem, but because they didn't clearly think about what was going on, or like I said, they allowed the moment to get away from them. Those are a little bit harder because you're terminating somebody based on a mistake. And many times, they regret it and they wish that it didn't happen, and they apologize and they want to do whatever it takes to make it right. But whatever it was, resulted in termination from a consistency standpoint.
Those are just as hard from a leadership standpoint too, because oftentimes some of those people they could be some of your best people, and a single mistake could get the better of them. And the reason why it's difficult is because obviously we know we have to hold everybody to the same standard. And the moment that you cut somebody a break for something that you wouldn't cut another person a break for, you're opening yourself up to some serious problems down the road. And so in order to hold everybody to that same standard, it can be whatever standard you want, but whatever it is, you have to make that decision as an organization. And when I say it can be whatever you want, I mean, if that's your job, is to make those standards, but the organization has decided on whatever that standard is. And if you own the organization, then that's you. But whatever that standard is, you decide it and you set it and you have to stick to it. And oftentimes you can find yourself in a situation where an employee you don't want to let go gets caught up in that. But there's nothing you can really do about it. So what I'm wondering is, when you find yourself in these situations, what do you do to make them easier for yourself, but more importantly, for the person who's about to lose their job?
Yeah, I think if it's one of these situations where it's something that, again, is not doesn't have to be dealt with swiftly, and it's not necessarily like a legal issue or things like that, but simply a result of like something like maybe attendance or something like a lack of performance, or even something like a process that's a well-known process. The person has done it many times in the past, and this time they just didn't follow it, and as a result of that, it costs the organization money or something like that, right? I think in those situations, it's really important to first and foremost have dialogue. As a leader, we've talked about it before on the podcast. You want to assume positive intent. You want to seek to understand. You want to be able to talk to your people, and I think it is vitally important to sit down with somebody, and have dialogue about it. And say, hey, we need to talk about this. And please help me understand what happened in this situation, right? And please, let me know what your thoughts were, what got you to that point. Why was this decision made, or why was this action done? And you allow them to have an opportunity to explain themselves. As a leader, many times you want to make sure that you're paying attention, that you're documenting exactly what's going on, because you're going to want to be able to take in partners and have dialogue, and you want to be able to make sure that you represent the individual, as clearly as possible, and be able to explain, from their side of things, maybe what happened, or what the situation was, what their intent was, or maybe what they, forgot to do or did incorrectly. I think the bigger part of that is then the follow-up before a termination. Is there should be the initial conversation in regards to collecting facts and getting statements and getting information from the individual. Then there's the second follow-up conversation, which is validating and verifying with them everything that they said, providing them with either thoughts or perspective, or how things are playing out, or what does this mean? Because now that you've gotten all the information, you've been able to research it yourself as a leader, you can kind of give them the entire scenario and story. And I think more importantly, making sure they understand that this could definitely lead to termination, and saying those things and having them talk through that and work through that. What you don't want to do is have a surprise. You don't want to sit down with somebody after they made a mistake or they did one of these things, and then say, okay, thank you for your time today and providing me with what you think. And then the next time you talk to them, it's like you no longer work here. I think it's really important that the dialogue continues, and that you have an opportunity to make sure that they understand the severity of the situation and what it could lead to, and allow them to maybe even have some of that emotional release, or talk through some of those things when it's not the time that you're actually going to be delivering termination paperwork.
Yeah, that's so true, especially from a standpoint of, if it doesn't lead to termination, it will help to impress upon them the gravity of the situation. Because if you say nothing else after you collect all the information, and you find out that, it doesn't lead to termination, then whatever that follow-up conversation is with, this is what we've decided to do, that might not necessarily impress upon them the importance of not doing it again. Whereas if you sit down with them and say, these are the potential outcomes here, this is kind of the best case scenario, this is the worst case scenario, and you lay it all out and you're honest about it, you don't speculate, you say this is specifically what can happen, and in the best case and the worst case, the natural tendency of a human being is to assume that what's going to happen is the worst case. And if the situation was severe enough or was grave enough, that might be a good thing in terms of making sure that the person comes out the other side of this, if they end up not losing their job, with a newfound respect for whatever that process was that maybe they were cavalier about to begin with. And so I like that. The second thing that I think that you mentioned I love is the idea of just being transparent with them. Not kind of playing things close to the vest. And I know I've been with organizations where that was the MO. It was, we don't let anybody know anything. We do our own thing inside, and then when it's time, we let the person know. And I don't know what the benefit of that is to the organization, but it never makes for people walking out of a building for the last time, no longer an employee, with a good taste in their mouth about that process. And if it was a theft issue or some type of integrity issue, I don't care. That's fine. You can walk out of the building without a good taste in your mouth for that organization if that's what you want. You're the one who made a terrible decision. But if it was a mistake, I really think the goal of any one of these conversations that leads to a termination is for that person to walk out of the building truly not blaming anybody but their own lack of judgment for a single moment. They don't even have to think that they're a bad employee or a bad person, but I want them to think highly of their leadership and the organization when they leave the building as a former employee. And it's not impossible to do, and it can be done right in such a way that leads the employee down that path.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great call. And I think another big piece of this, many times that I see with newer leaders and people that maybe don't have as much experience in having to deal with situations like this, is there tends to be this thing where they either want to borrow authority and kind of play the you know how HR is if your organization has an HR department, or I wish I could do something here, but my hands are tied. As a leader, it is imperative that when you're working through these situations, that you don't shift the blame, that you don't kind of delegate the decision, because in any organization where you have a leader of people and then you have other partners that may be involved in many of these types of decisions, at the end of the day, that's your role as the leader, is to be the one who, collects the information, takes on the partners, provides perspective, gives the insight, and in many organizations, it's a conversation and a discussion about what does consistency look like as an organization, that type of thing. But you, as the leader, truly are the brand representative to that employee. And it doesn't do any good to be a passive player in this process. Not when you're the leader, not when you're the one who has to have the dialogue and the conversation. So I call that out because there's been many times when I've seen leaders make the wrong thing and say hey, sorry you made this mistake, and the company and consistency, and if there's anything that I can do, and and then they'll go kind of down the empathetic path of let me help you get a job, and if you need a reference, I can do that. They do all these things and they make these promises, and they don't really just own it and work through the process of the organization and be a leader in the moment and provide the dialogue with the employee. And at the same time, it's not about being mean or being, not engaged or dismissive of them, but it is at that point being the representative of the brand in a situation where you have to take that ownership as a leader. And make sure that the messaging is very clear and that there is no shuffling of responsibility here. And even if you personally, maybe you don't agree or you feel a certain way about it, that's that's a part of the role, is that you've got to also make sure that you are protecting and representing the brand appropriately, even if you feel a certain way about it. But that's why you raise your hand and say, I'm a leader and I'm going to do my role and do my job and make sure that I am representing the brand to the best of my ability.
Right. I think that's true. I think there's an importance of a united front once a decision is made. So that's 100% true. I think if a leader is in that situation you just mentioned, where they're trying to be almost an advocate for the employee that they're about to terminate or they've just terminated, and they're looking at their own organization as almost like the they or the them that's kind of forcing this to happen, that it means one of two things. Either they are shirking their responsibility. They don't want to have the awkward conversation, so they'd rather blame the organization to get through an awkward conversation. And if that's the case, I mean, that's terrible leadership. You're setting the employee up for potential future action, thinking that maybe you're planting a seed in their head that maybe this was not a righteous decision, that it was something that the employee could fight or for whatever reason, instead of just helping them exit with dignity gracefully and move on. Or they genuinely don't understand the why behind it. And so I can put myself in a situation where I was told I had to terminate somebody and I didn't think they should have been terminated. And fortunately, I raised my hand and I said, I don't think they should be terminated and this is why. And what I got in response was, okay, this is why they should, A, B, C. And I left that conversation with, oh, now I understand why they should be fired. And so if you're a leader and you find yourself in that situation where you want to be an advocate for somebody because you don't understand why, it is your job as a leader to reach out to people who will help you understand why. Because one of two things will happen. Either the person that you are talking to in the organization doesn't know the full story, and you'll convince them, and the person will end up keeping their job, or you don't understand fully what's going on, or the parameters of what the process is, and then they will help you understand that. But at the end of that conversation, you and your HR team, your leaders, the people who are involved in this decision need to come to a consensus on what the right decision is for both the employee and the organization. And that when that meeting ends, there's no breaking from that. Everybody is the decision maker collectively because you talked it out. So when you have that conversation with the employee and you tell them they're no longer an employee, it is, if the question ever comes from that employee, who made this decision, then the answer is you can name off the people who did, and you need to be one of them. Well, the decision was made because I partnered with our human resources department, and whoever the senior vice president or the district manager, or whoever it was that you partnered with, and be honest about it. And this is the conversation we had, and this is the conclusion we came to, and we all believe this way. And so that united front is, not only will it lower the chances of the employee thinking they can drive a wedge between you and the other people, it also helps them kind of move on from the situation more quickly, I think.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great call, and I think the language of the we is really important there, because it very rarely is one individual as far as the direct leader themselves, and many times it's a collection or a conversation amongst many individuals, which is what should happen. You should always be able to have many people take a look at something to make sure that the right decision is being made. And then the only other thing I would have a question for you on is around time frame. That one typically can be a very sore subject, and something that personally I struggle with, because my belief is that if you're looking to, potentially terminate somebody's employment, my thought is that should be a priority, and that's something that needs to be decided, quickly and in an acceptable amount of time. But I also don't necessarily, have an opinion on what an acceptable amount of time is. So I would love your thoughts on that. Like, what do you think when somebody does something like this that can lead to termination? And again, it's not something that's based on integrity or theft or whatever. Between them doing it and the first conversation to sitting them down and terminating them, what do you believe is a acceptable amount of time between those two things happening?
I think the answer to that question is determined upon whether or not they're being paid in the interim. So I think if the idea is to make sure that whatever happens, that you are doing whatever you can to disrupt this employee's life as little as possible, given the fact that they're about to lose their job, and that's a major disruption to their life. And so if the first conversation where you take a statement, you also have to suspend the employee and they're not going to be paid, then I think that you have the onus is on you to make it happen literally as soon as possible. Like, there is no way that becomes at the top of the priority list of everything you're doing, because it allows the employee to move on and get them whatever their final paycheck is, and allow them to start looking for a job elsewhere. And hopefully, if you've done a good job in telling them the gravity of the situation, hopefully they're taking this time and they're already starting to look for another job, or at least seeing what their prospects are. I know that's what I would do, is I'd want to make sure that I saw the next vine in the jungle if I was about to have to let go of the vine I was currently on while swinging. I think you have a little bit more time if the employee's being paid. So if it's like, oh, I'll take your statement, go back to work, do your best, we'll talk more when we have time, then maybe you have a little bit more time because the employee is still getting paid. And I don't mean you have months or weeks, but you have a few more days to kind of look into it and do right by the employee and make sure that you're, at the end of the day, you want to make sure that the information is accurate. So having to act on it in 48 hours versus a week, it doesn't mean that you can tolerate the wrong action or the wrong decision. It just means that you need to be persistent with the people you have to partner with to make sure that you don't get put on hold, because this decision is important.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And with that, it brings us to this episode's 1 Minute Hack.
The 1 Minute Hack.
Okay, this episode's 1 Minute Hack is about preparation. If you're about to terminate somebody's employment, you need to make sure that you are prepared to do it. You need to make sure that the employee has known that the potential of being terminated has been on the table. This is not going to be a surprise to them. You need to make sure that you have given the employee an opportunity to give their side of the story and that you have laid out the potential options to them. This is the time to take partners whenever possible, to make sure that you have your information in your head before you sit down with somebody, that you're not planting the idea in an employee's head that they may be terminated unless you're sure it is an option, and that you're also making sure that you're telling the employee that it is an option as soon as you know that, to let the employee have time to get their ducks in a row, whether that be rewriting their resume or reaching out to colleagues that might be able to help them land safely. Anything that you can do to make it so the employee exits the organization gracefully and with a good taste in their mouth for you as a leader and the organization is important. The most important part is to make sure that the employee leaves that organization believing that every single person there is in agreement that they should no longer work there, that there isn't a single dissenting voice somewhere in the background, you or anybody else, that they may be able to talk to and make inroads with. This is the time to make sure that you use the we language and not the they language. Anytime you can make that happen when you're terminating an employee, you're more likely to allow that employee to move on more quickly and get on with their life.
Yeah, I think it's a great woman to hack, and I completely agree. You know, the preparation piece and really taking it serious. I mean, it's a serious situation anytime that you're going to terminate somebody, and making sure that you would approach that with the same intent and passion for developing people and leading people is really, really important, for them. Like I said, many times mistakes happen and people make bad choices and bad decisions. It doesn't make them a bad person. And, being able to walk them through that piece and, allow them to understand that there are consequences with behaviors, can be a really, really big life lesson, and allow them to learn from that, grow from that, and move on.
Yeah, I agree with that. Just anecdotally, I've had to terminate people where they were clearly unhappy in the role they were in too. And so if this is an employee where you can look at their performance, people who enjoy their job typically perform better than people who don't. And so if you have people working for you that you're about to terminate and their performance has been poor and their relationships are not great with people they work alongside, it's a good bet that that employee doesn't enjoy their time there. They don't enjoy being there. So if you're the leader and you have to terminate them, make sure that conversation comes along the same lines of another conversation, whereas let's help you land safely, not from a let me help you get you a job standpoint, but psychologically, there are places you will obviously be happier at. And if you can help an employee see that during that conversation, they might be able to leave that conversation with a better feeling about it than just, oh, you were fired.
Yep, completely agree. And with that, it brings us to the end of this episode. This is Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Lorenzo.
And I'm Chris.
And we'll talk to you all next time.